a lot of people say they got goals, but they've never wrote them down. They don't have goals. They have a whole bunch of wishful thinking. They got a whole lot of brain drifts going on. Goals are when you actually set them down in stone. You write them down. You write them down, and then you start formulating plans for you put a timetable on them, and then you put a plan together, a logical plan to reach those goals and meet them. I think things like that is important. Goal setting, writing down your principles, writing down a success plan. I think all those things are very, very important because they keep us structured and they keep us focused. It ain't for everybody else to see. It ain't for everybody else to even know about it. But you need to know who you are and how you operate. And it's
If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social
Willing
group.
to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking
die
about
for.
tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those living, those yet unborn, and those who are the
How
ancestors.
long is your list?
So the connection with the ancestors is tied into the tribal self.
Panther 48.
What does that mean? That means that the tribal self constantly reminds us
Willing to die for.
that we don't have the
How
right
long is your
to
list?
claim independence.
Panther 48.
peace and power. Once again, this your big brother site, 130 the Panther 48, calling out of Texas. I have my brother Robert Ward Williams, chairman of the San Diego chapter of the Black Panther Party, calling out of California.
All power to people, everyone.
And we have the Oracle himself, baking cookies, calling out of Florida, Brother E, our Minister of Information Emeritus,
Word, that's right. I'm also the Warridian translator. Go ahead.
and the Warridian translator. Anyway, today we're going to revisit our discussion on principles, what they are and the importance of them. We're probably going to bump a few heads just a little bit. Before we get started, though, y'all know what I like to do. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to deal with definitions. I'm going to define these concepts and these words like we started out before we get into the discussion and the dialogue. And I'm even going to define why defining is so important itself. The word define is a compound word, which is D and fine. Fine is the root word of finite. So to be finite or to be finite is to have boundaries, to have a limitation. If something is infinite without boundaries, without limitations, it's impossible to comprehend because there is no ending to it. So if you think about how the human being understands his reality, you got to understand that first without having a proper understanding of a word, a philosophy, a concept, or an idea. It's infinite. In order for us to comprehend it, we have to bring it out of the clouds. We have to break it down. We have to take it out of infinity and place boundaries around it, meaning D to bring it down, and then fine to place boundaries around it, define. So that's what the word definition or define literally means, to bring an ideal out of the clouds and place it down on earth where we can actually tangibly deal with it, where we can comprehend it. That's what the word literally means. Matter of fact, the word comprehend literally means to grasp. That's what it literally means. So to comprehend an idea means that you can grasp the idea with your mind. And the only way you can grasp ideas with your mind is to be able to define them. So I'm going to deal with definitions. Anyway, we're going to talk about principles. And the defined principles, I think I have to define a few other things that a lot of times that we misconstrue for principles. We mistake them for principles. But the word principle literally means, this is the literal meaning of the word principle. Principle literally means first or one. So principle is a law of nature as formulated and accepted by the mind. Second definition, an essential truth upon which other truths are based. So a principle is a foundation of something. It's an essential truth, meaning that at its essence, it's an undeniable indisputable, irrefutable fact, proof, and truth that other truths are founded on. That's what a principle is. That's why if I said the word in basically the word principle literally means one or the first. That's why the son of a king is called a prince. Root word prince is the root word of the word principle, because he's the first in line to become the king. And that's why the person that heads or leads a school is called a principal, because that is the first in command. That is the highest author of command inside the school system. But that's what a principle is. It's the foundational truth that other truths are based on. Then we have another word that sometimes we may mistake for principle. When we say principle, a lot of times, and I'm defining these words, because a lot of times we hear these words and we're triggered. A lot of times we'll hear a word and we think we understand the definition, and they trigger us into a response that is not necessarily what the person is talking about or what the group is trying to convey. But another word is rule. The word rule is the body of official regulations setting forth the method of play in a sport or the method of procedure in some other group activity. The word rule is the root of the word ruler. And the word ruler is synonymous with a king or somebody who leads. But if you think about what a ruler truly is, a ruler is also that little thing that we use to measure. It's that little thing that we use. It usually has 12 inches on it, and it gives us the definition of a foot. It defines for us the area of a foot. It defines that, at least to the limitation of that. So a rule becomes the standard in which we operate on. Another word that a lot of times people mistake principle for is moral. And a moral is not necessarily grounded in actual fact, but a moral is something that the group itself agrees on, because a moral is concerned with right and wrong and the distinctions between the two. And we're going to get into a discussion and a dialogue and a debate about all of this in a few minutes. The word ethics, you done heard a lot of times we confuse these with principles, but an ethic is a branch of philosophy dealing with morality, basically attempting to define and break down what is right or what is wrong. And I know for a fact all three of us will have our own opinions about what right and what wrong is and is not, especially Brother E over there. And last but not least is law. You know, it's others like values and virtues, but I decided to keep them out. Another is law. And a law is a custom or practice recognized as binding by a community. Again, it's not something that's just necessarily actual fact, but it's a common group of people have come to an agreement that this thing is something that we're going to abide by. And when someone violates that particular law, then we call that thing a crime. Crime does not exist without law. In order for there to be a crime, there has to be a law prohibiting such behavior. You know, and I wanted to get those definitions and give a well-rounded, as Brother War love to say. What do you say your 3 Ds are, Brother War?
Define, develop, and defend.
So I think it's necessary for us to define these things. Then we're going to develop our understanding, and if necessary, we're going to defend these concepts. But so I laid that as the foundational groundwork that we're gonna present our argument from. Anyway, Brother War, I'm gonna pass the mic to you to come in and break down your understanding of principles, their importance or non-importance.
Well, first, what I like to do on that note is let me add a little bit more from the way I see it in regards to a moral and a principle, because I think the argument, or should I say the discrepancy, comes in the fact that too many people interchange the concept of morality and principles. And whereas when you're dealing with morals, is based on a general code of ethics and values rooted in expected behavior with an emphasis on how you would like to be. Whereas being principled is based on discipline, respect, rooted in self-awareness, going back to what you said about wholeness or oneness, with an emphasis on a set of living standards intact regardless of how others around you behave. And I think that's where we get the conflict and the problem in regards to how people live their life, is because when you talk about being principled, the deal is that doesn't change based upon the environment. Typically being principled is just how you decide and how you want to be disciplined in terms of your life and what you in your value system, regardless of, like I said, regardless of how other people around you behave or their expectations. And so when we interchange principles with morality and expect other people to operate on our principled behavior, whereas we're not seeing the distinction between the two, then I think that's where we run into problems, because simply because I am able to, or I believe, or I accept, or I operate from a certain code in terms of a principle, don't mean everybody else around me does. And I think that kind of morphs into the collective value based on what you talk about with the ethics as it applies to that. So to me, being principled or saying talking about a principle just goes into a way of life. Whereas everybody may have certain things that they may be they may be principled about, as opposed to the morality that we all share collectively. The deal is we pick and choose our principles, and that don't necessarily always line up with morality. Oftentimes, especially as we get older, and then when you specifically deal with having to raise another generation underneath you, then you usually tighten up in terms of morality as well as your principles. And so experience oftentimes ends up being the best teacher or the best guide for living a principled life. Whereas that's not always the case when you talk about a rule or a law, because, especially law, because laws typically, especially in this society, and I don't want to distract from the concept, but laws are typically governed by punishments and by punishments and fines. And so oftentimes when you think about a law, it's all about whatever you can get away with. So from a political standpoint, they say laws are meant to be broken. Whereas a principle is not. A principle is meant to be lived by regardless.
Anyway, back to what Ward was saying. And see, this is how we end up having this discussion or this build on principles last time, because I found it important to teach young brothers when I was in the gulags. I found it important to teach young brothers to sit down and map out their personal principles. And the reason I found that to be important, because it was very instrumental for me for organizing and structuring my own life. But sometimes men don't know what they believe. They don't know what they stand on. They don't know what they operate on. They don't know what they'll kill, live, die, and go to prison for. They don't know. They don't understand what those principles are. Some men pretend like they hold those principles, and they really don't. And so I thought it was important for men to sit down and create a blueprint of what their principles are. Now, from a warrior standpoint, it becomes important it becomes a strategic thing not to allow other people to know exactly what your principles are unless you're moving in the same operation, like organizations. Any organization has a set of values or principles that's laid as its foundation, that's accepted as these are things that you're not supposed to do. However, here we go when we're dealing with the study of sociology. In sociology, you have a concept called game theory. Now, in game theory, you come to understand, like, for example, if you're a criminal and you operate in the criminal world, you have certain principles that are supposed to be the foundation of how we move and operate. One of the things was no snitching, because snitching protected the game. You was just an individual. Ideally, you were just an individual. You're just one piece, but the game itself has lasted forever. The game, from the standpoint of a person operating in the street culture, the game is what fed my father. It's what fed his father before him. It's what took care of our families. It's what allowed us to put food on the table. So the game exists in order to give us the ability to operate, as Huey called it, from a what did he call it? Illegitimate capitalist point of view. That's what he called it, illegitimate capitalism. But so if we protect the game, even though I myself may get took out, the game itself exists so that others, hundreds and thousands, can play the game and still operate and live off the game. Here's the problem. If you do that, That means that you have to be principled enough to, if you get caught up in a specific situation, that you don't violate the code, and it might take you out the game, but it allows the game to exist. Now, here's the thing about game theory. With the understanding of game theory, those in power in this country, they had the same issue with the mafia, with the so-called Italian mafia. And they had the code of murder. That was one of their principles, one of the foundations of their organization. Don't speak. And so since nobody was speaking, you could never get the dons, you could never get the big wigs. Then they created RICO laws, and then they created the 501k, I think that's what it's called, and basically the snitching law, where it allows you to snitch up on a higher up and get the cases off you. So if you're caught following the order of your boss doing a crime, you can snitch on your boss, which will put the time on him, and it'll free you from your time. Therefore, they was applying the concept of game theory. Do I stake to my principle and basically I go do 100 years, or do I say forget those principles? Those principles were convenient for the moment, but now it's convenient for me not to stand on that principle, snitch on Don E, and get out of this time. Let E go do that time. You know, so that's where, especially from that point of view, that the principle may come back and bite a person in the behind.
I say this about that. To me, when you talk about that kind of goes into the law, the universal law of treason. That's why treason is punishable by death. Whether we talking about it from the American law, or talking about it from game theory, or talking about it from any position of turning your back and basically dishonoring the code, the codes that you're supposed to live by in terms of that society. So when you commit treason, now all of a sudden, that's why debt comes behind that. Whereas that's like the only one that has to do with a death sentence that is not equal to you committing actual murder on somebody.
True indeed, and I agree 100% with that. And I'm not, when I say this, understand that I'm not telling anyone that they should kill people that violate these principles. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about an ideal, but I understand that there are certain things that we are not allowed to do because of the society we live in. But like you just said, well, in ancient times, before we created this so-called advanced civilization, those that violated the principles of the group was punished. Like, for example, the human being, and we look at the nature and the makeup of the human being. The human being is not the strongest creature on the planet. He's not the fastest. He doesn't hear the best. He doesn't see the best. He doesn't fly better. And none of those things. So we all know that what evolution, from an evolutionary standpoint, what allowed the human being to be the premier creature on the planet is the development of our brain and the development of a neocortex. We all understand this. But the thing that helped us survive all those thousands of years was our ability to come together as a group. The group protected you. When you was moving, before we created cities and buildings and armies and all this, we was moving in the wilderness, and it was the protection of the group that took care of you, that fed you, that watched over you when you got sick, that protected you, that helped fight with you against stronger and faster animals, that hunted for you when you was a child and not able to hunt for yourself, and then you started participating in that activity yourself once you became old enough. Once you was trained, it was the group that trained you, that brought you from boyhood to manhood. It was the group that did these things. So the group was extremely important for your existence. Without it, you would have died. There's no way you would have made it from an infant to toddler, from toddler to child, a child to adult. It wouldn't have happened. So you needed the group. So there were certain mores that the group had established over time, customs that the group had established, their foundational principles of the tribe or the group itself. And if you violated those principles, you could be killed, you could be beheaded, you could be forced into, depending on the level of violation, you could be forced into one-on-one combat, you could be forced into group combat in the prisons of America, in prison. If a member of a group violates one of the principles of the group, he could be what they call disciplined, where he might have to fight, depending on what group he belongs to. Everybody got different things, but he might have to, like, let's say if he's a 5 deuce Hoover, for example, he might have to fight 5, then he may have to fight 2. 5 at one time, then 2. Or depending on where he is, he might have to do a back door. It might be 8 dudes, but he'll get a one-on-one fight, but they'll back door. The one come in and he'll fight until somebody drop, then the second one come in, fight till somebody drop, so forth, so on. But back to ancient time, so he may be killed. But the greatest thing that can happen to you in those ancient times, because the group was so important, if you violated the principles of the group, you'll be excommunicated. You'll be kicked out. So now here you was wandering in the wilderness by yourself without the protection of the group. And you would not survive long without being excommunicated like that. And he said that one of my favorite books is the Bible. It is. And in the Bible, you see this consistently. Once a violation of those foundational principles takes place. Adam and Eve in the garden, God kicked them out. Cain killed his brother, he got kicked out. Every time you see this violation, they're being excommunicated from the group, so the group was extremely important. It was your lifeline. So you had to operate off the principles that the group founded, and if you didn't, you was excommunicated from the group. So these things was extremely important for the development of humanity.
But principles, like anything else, are fluid. So the principle, and I completely agree that at a point in a person's development, principles absolutely need to be as concrete as possible. But at the same time, understanding the nature of a principle, we start to see that it's actually as fluid as anything else. Because while it's frowned upon for, what is his name? Sammy the Bull. He the one that went for Congress. It was frowned upon for him to snitch. It's not so frowned upon if somebody within the crew had been snitching to him about somebody else in the crew. You see what I'm saying? Snitching, whether it's accepted or not accepted, good, bad, whatever, is still scenario dependent. If you snitching on the crew to the feds, that's bad, shame, shame, shame. But if I go and snitch on this guy over here because he's messing up our boss, then the snitching is okay. In one scenario, you're expected to snitch. You're supposed to keep an eye on those that you work with that are around you in order to maintain the body, in order to maintain really who's on top of the body. But in another scenario, snitching, the act of snitching, because the players changed and the juxtapositioning and who you're telling changed, then all of a sudden that same idea of telling daddy on somebody doing wrong, all of a sudden becomes a no-no.
Of course, though, but think about it. That makes all the sense in the world, because you going to snitching to an enemy that would destroy our entire collaboration, an enemy that will eliminate us. And therefore, like I was saying earlier, get rid of the game that actually protects us and feeds us. But if you are making moves like when we was all in the party, if you're making moves that is not only destructive to the party but destructive to the community, it is my responsibility to the party to bring you up on charges before the party. I'm supposed to bring you up on charges, and so my loyalty and my dedication should be to the party. If my loyalty and my dedication is to the party, and the party is taking care of all of us as individuals, then by me being loyal and dedicated to the party takes care of us. But if my loyalty and dedication is only to you, then sometimes we may make moves that are harm and hurt the party, which could eliminate the entire group. And that's the difference between that going and taking it to the body and then taking it to the enemy. You don't want to take it to the enemy because the enemy would destroy us. The enemy's goal is to eliminate us. And we talked about the mafia. In that scenario, they had created a system that was essentially was almost foolproof. Only problem is that you still had human nature. I need to preserve self. Self-preservation is the first law of human nature. I need to preserve me. You had human nature in effect, and so therefore you had an enemy that comprehended human nature. And therefore that enemy played to the human nature and the need of the human being to save self, and therefore sacrifice others for his own salvation. Same thing happened with dude named Apple. Do y'all know who Apple is? I don't know if y'all keep up with street culture, street legend. You ever seen the movie what's the name of that movie? Paid in Full?
Yeah.
That Rockefeller did. Okay, the guy Cameron played, that's Apple, which was a real life character. They just changed the names in the movie, probably because they didn't have permission to use these dude's story and probably would have to pay him for whatever the reason. But that story was a true story. That actually happened. Apple killed his homeboy to take the keys, to take the bricks of cocaine, and he shot down to Washington, D.C. and started moving weight down to Washington, D.C. and came up. You know, big time boss came up on killing his homeboy. You know, his homeboy got the bricks to try to because his little brother got kidnapped, and he was trying to get his little brother back. But his homeboy Apple killed him, took the bricks, went to Washington, D.C. Anyway, when he got busted in Washington, D.C., he snitched on everybody down there. He told on everybody, even on his hitman. He had a hitman named Wayne Perry. Wayne Perry, to this day, is still in ADX Max, basically underground. I think the prison is in, I can't, is it in Denver? Denver, Colorado? Yeah,
that's that area. Yeah, that's the one that's up in that area.
Yeah, he's still there. Considered to be the most supermax prison in the country. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, in the United States of America. It's where Jeff Ford, it's where Larry Hoover, it's where Sundiata, it's where all those brothers at. Every is where what was that dude name? The Unabomber, all them dudes was there. But
Malik Isaac York was there, and he didn't kill anybody.
Yeah,
it's mine.
Yeah, so the dude is still, so you know, Apple told, you know, game theory prevailed. It benefits me to look out for myself and basically tell on another person to get another person hit. Matter of fact, he tried to go back to Harlem, which is where he was from, and thought he could set up shop, and he just recently got killed. Somebody took him out just because he showed up in Harlem. And see, that was another thing, like War said, treason. If you violated those codes that we had established, then the rule was, it's supposed to be 2 rules. They don't follow them now, but it was supposed to be 2 rules if you violated those codes. One, none of us would talk to you. You was out of the game. You can't come nowhere and hustle. You can't come nowhere and make no money. You can't come nowhere. You can't shoot no dice. You can't do nothing. You had the scarlet letter. We don't talk to you. Second, somebody was supposed to take your head, even if you didn't do it to me. If I'm in the game, then you violated the game, and somebody was supposed to get you. It's supposed to be understood. And when you operate on them, and I'm not promoting violence. I'm not saying go kill people, but I truly believe that those things keep people in line. They keep people operating the way people are supposed to operate. That's why even today, when people violate principles that we got established between each other, I cut them off. I kill them mentally. I don't kill nobody physically, but I kill them mentally. I cut them out of my life. I don't want to have nothing to do with them. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to be around them. I try to make sure that I breathe the least amount of air the same air that they breathe as possible. You know what I'm saying? And that's just how I operate. Go ahead, E. I know you're ready to get in there.
So then I would say, judging based on the fact that everything you said, every example you give just adds to what it is I said.
What it is you said? What it is you said?
That the principle of not snitching, you don't snitch, is fluid, because every example you give, it morphs just a little bit. It changes just a little bit. There is no snitching is always right or snitching is always wrong. That don't exist.
You don't. You don't. Snitch. I think you're using the word snitch with any form of telling, I guess you could say. Let's call it telling. Any form of informing, any form of giving information. Snitch is a street slang word utilized for giving information to the authorities that can actually eliminate the game that's being played. Now, see, here's the thing. A citizen, a civilian that's not in the game, and again, I'm using it from a criminal standpoint, a citizen that's not in the game is supposed to call the police in their understanding. Those people that, because I'm not in the game anymore, but those who are in the game understand that the game is supposed to take care of its own. You are never supposed to tell the authority. See, that's the difference. That's the difference. And so when those who decide to play the game, when the game to get too hot, to get out of the situation, they loved everything that came with the benefits that came with the game. But when it come time to accept responsibility and be accountable for the things that you've done and to get life that you've chosen to lead, many have decided that hell no, I'm supposed to get this off me. And that's where the violation comes in. That's where the snitching comes in. But nothing, I can agree with you from this point of view. There is very few things on the planet that is just simply unmovable. There's very, very few things on the planet that doesn't have some wiggle room in it. And I'm not saying, because I'm a true believer, and it's just my personal point of view, I'm a true believer that under no condition should you snitch on your comrade. In no way, form, or fashion. As like Sandiata said, a quote, he said, I'm a black revolutionary. He say, I do not help the authority. I do not snitch on my comrades or other oppressed people in no way, form, or fashion. That's what defines me. I am a black revolutionary. Simple as that. And I believe in that type of principle stand. I have a lot of respect for that type of stand. I have a lot of respect for that. You understand what I'm saying? And so to me, there's never a reason for it. What you have to do is you have to be real with yourself, and you have to actually analyze self and look at self and say, can I operate on this point of view and take everything that may come with it? See, a lot of times what immature and irrational people do is they take a side, they start walking down a lane, and then they will think about the bads that could happen. They only think about the goods. And so when they're hit with the bads, they're not willing to accept everything that came with decisions that they made. And then they try to get it off them. That to me, that's the most immature way of thinking that exists in my thinking.
Let me say this real quick. Just when we talk about going into Panther cell theory, what you're talking about between the two is protection of the organism. From that standpoint, basically, everything that embodies the Panther way of life has to be protected. So therefore, that breaks down the difference between what you call, something would maybe called petty treason as opposed to high treason. Whereas the petty treason is exposing or ridding something or somebody that is destructive to the organism. Whereas a high treason would be something that's going to bring down the sovereignty of the organism. And so from that standpoint, it is expected that everybody within the body of the organism itself does its part and protect the collective from anything, any what you call any threats, whether it be internal, or what the United States would call foreign or domestic. So from that standpoint, regardless of where the attack initiates, internal or external, those that are part of the body must protect the body from all forms of attack, internal or external. So that basically means at some point in time, if need be, you have to, reveal something that's going on by some other person that is, destructive to the collective body.
100%. And that leads me back to saying what I was saying earlier about, and why I brought up the discussion for the last time, that I believe that it was important. And like last time we were going to do the principal show, this is why I brought it up. And this is what I actually wanted to do. Because a lot of people, most people haven't taken our time to really think about their lives. So they don't know what principles they stand on. They just never identified them. And a lot of times I think it's extremely important and beneficial for people to take out the time to actually understand self, to write. To me, a lot of people say they got goals, but they've never wrote them down. They don't have goals. They have a whole bunch of wishful thinking. They got a whole lot of brain drifts going on. Goals are when you actually set them down in stone. You write them down. And then you start formulating plans for you put a timetable on them. And then you put a plan together, a logical plan to reach those goals and meet them. I think things like that is important. Goal setting, writing down your principles. writing down a success plan. I think all those things are very, very important because they keep us structured and they keep us focused. It ain't for everybody else to see. It ain't for everybody else to even know about it. But you need to know who you are and how you operate. And especially if you incorporate another human being into your life from the beginning, you need to be able to sit down and break down and build with them what you stand on and what you operate on. They need to know that. But in order for them to know it, you have to know it. And that's why I gave the task of all the younger brothers sitting down writing their principle. Like, we have an unspoken principle. There are things that we haven't sat down with amongst us three and said, this is what we're going to operate on. But I'm sure that these things we all agree is just founded on how we deal with one another in this relationship. Like, for instance, I like to believe that we have a principle that neither one of us would mess with each other's wives. I like to believe that principle is just, even though we've never discussed that, I like to believe that's just common sense. And we understand that. But so because I believe that, this where y'all say I mess up, I believe that everybody else operate how I operate. Y'all might not operate on that. Y'all might would tear my wife up in a heartbeat.
God,
you know what I'm saying? And the thing is, if you did, I'm cutting you off. I'm not dealing with you. I'm cutting you completely out of my life. If if you went and slept with Eve's wife, I'm not talking to you anymore. I'm cutting you off. Because I look at you, and it's not even a moral standpoint. I'm not even coming from no morality. I used to tell dudes that I used to tell my little brother all the time, don't mess with married women, don't mess with women in serious relationships. It's not even about morality. It's about the unnecessary problems that may come out of that. Some married dude that have been married to this woman for the last 10 years, that live in a house with this woman, that have provided for this woman kids, you run around sleeping with this married woman, we might have to go to war with this dude behind this. And there is no point in bringing that into your life. So it's impractical. It doesn't make sense. You understand what I'm saying? And that's the same thing I'm talking about our relationship. That would harm the quality of our relationship. Let's say we all in a thriving Panther chapter. Let's say the Dallas chapter is boom, boots on the ground, going out. We all just in it. But War wants to run around and sleep with everybody, with all the membership's wives. How would that harm our unity? How would that harm our effectiveness in the community? So to me, being the architect type thinker that I am, we have to move on practicality. It has to make sense. And certain things just simply make sense for us to stick to certain standards to. Go ahead, E.
So, number one, if War slept with my wife, I'd be in awe, because since I ain't got one, that'd be a really good magic trick.
Oh, of course. I don't have one either, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Number two, a principle is only a principle as long as you choose it to be a principle. Not sleeping with each other's spouses is something we choose not to do. And so we step back and pull that principle out and says, this is a principle that I like. It has nothing to do with the principle's existence out there. All I'm doing is illustrating it or giving it breath and saying it in these words. But that principle is still something that I chose, that came out of me to adhere to. So the principle is still at the behest of the individuals involved.
True indeed.
If we never said that principle that you said, I seriously doubt it would ever happen between any of the three of us. We ain't got to say it. Not because it's a principle, but because it's who we are. And that principle simply translates it when it needs to be translated. Like you said, some are just unspoken. It ain't gonna happen. But if somebody came to you and said, yo, War's wife is flying amok, are you gonna hit that? You would then turn around and in some course of the dialogue and put that into a form, into a word. And one of them culture shows, the idea I was trying to get across is that a word is a sound with intent. So you would take this intent of maintaining a particular relationship between the three of us, and part of that is, I don't fuck your wife. And so that intent is set to sound. It's like putting a message on a copper cable or in the air for the internet, for a phone call. You're taking that sound, word, all of those words, taking your intent, maintain this relationship and don't do this. This is how I am. and you're projecting it into the world, and people see that and say, oh, that's a principle. But the reality of it is, it's just sight. He goes by it, he chooses to live by it because it appeals to him. It's something that he sees that he likes, that he gravitates toward, that is a natural something that he exudes. So it, again, just illustrating what's already there. And that's why I say codes are written by men who don't need them for men who will never heed them. Because again, you're only going to heed it as long as it feeds into your purpose, as long as it feeds into your how you see yourself. And the more you grow and develop, the way you see yourself changes. The principles stay the same. We had a situation, years ago where accusations were laid out. But that principle was then the way it is now, though we've evolved and grown to different points in our lives and different understandings and understanding more deeply. Why wouldn't I fuck War Sykes' girl? Why? Why is that something, I'm back in the day, other cats, I'm just saying, I'm not bragging. I'm not telling you to go out there. Young Hov did that, so hopefully you won't have to go through that. I was sleeping with other dudes' wives, whatever, I did the shit. But when it came to this scenario, it was just something that I wasn't going to do. Now I'm at a point where I can look in hindsight and I can see, oh, okay, that's why we're here now. And if I had done some bullshit like that back then, we wouldn't have this to build on. We wouldn't have this relationship. So the principle I expressed in a scenario, didn't express in another scenario, and now I've grown to understand better why. But I don't have to cling to the principle. I'm clinging to the purpose, and my purpose made use of that because now y'all are useful and have been useful in my life, in my growth and development. So I called y'all in, set up these rules that unspoken, okay, we never said it, but we understand it because that's who we are. We're not gonna fuck each other's girls, and built. And now we can look back and say, that's why the fuck I did it, because this dude, War and Sight, they feed into my purpose.
I do got to throw a monkey wrench in there. Even though we're talking about this from the standpoint of unspoken, when you're talking about collective principle, I say it has to be spoken.
Well, duh.
I agree.
No, it doesn't have to be spoken. Why does it have to be spoken? Were you trying to accuse somebody of some war? Get it off your chest, bro. What you got to say? I mean, shit.
What it goes into the whole fluidity aspect you talked about. And again, when you talk about collective principle, for the sake of that relationship, when you find yourself falling, or should I say, accepting a concept of implied, then you do give yourself you do give yourself an opening for error. You do give yourself an opening for something to possibly not to mess that up. In other words, let me just say this.
What's the question?
For the sake of dealing with a stronger bond or a mutual bond between a set group, the penalty for not sharing the same principles goes into the concept that we call treason. And for no other reason other than the code of honor of accepting the repercussions of not abiding by a collective principle, then you're bound.
True indeed. Now see, let me now see, I know E likes to stay fluid. I know E likes to be all over the place. And I get it.
That would be the principle. That would be the principle. See, I'm the ninja samurai, baby.
No, you got the principle. You just don't want to accept it. But
now,
yeah, you got a principle. Everybody got a principle. But okay, look at this. Now here's the difference. I'm going to use the Bible again that E loves so much. Here's the thing. Okay, I'm gonna show you something. Okay, I'm gonna look at the Old Testament. I'm gonna look at the New Testament. Look at what Moses, he's considered the lawgiver. He came to a savage people, the Israelites. And the first thing he had to do was he had to establish something. It was two major things that he had to establish that would civilize these savages. One, he had to give them their history. So if you look in the book of Moses, the books of Moses, the Torah, you'll see the history of his people. He gave them a foundation in their history and their culture. The next thing he gave them was laws. That's what he gave them. So what War is talking about is when we start to realize that we want to move amongst the same organization, we want to operate from the same cultural standpoint, then we take those unspoken principles, those things that we value as virtues, and we establish them as laws. Those things become laws. In organization, we call them bylaws. Those things become laws that we have set. And then those things are understood. Members agree to them, even if, because most people, especially if they haven't evolved mentally, even if these people have pretend like they accept the laws of the group just to turn around and go against the laws. But it becomes, now we have set the laws, and it becomes our responsibility to enforce those laws. See, human beings operate off incentives. That's one of the 10 principles of economics. That's one of the 10 principles of economics. And economic teachers say that there are basically, and again, we're using principles interchangeably with other things, morals, codes, because principles are those truths that other truths are founded on. We got to remember that. But they said there are 10 principles, basic things. There's no way around it. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You're always going to face trade-offs. You can't have everything you want. You got to trade one thing you want for another thing that you want. You got to face trade-offs. And human beings operate off incentives. So that's why I say that people have to be excommunicated when they violate the customs of the group. Because if we don't excommunicate them, if we keep them here, if we keep feeding them, we keep protecting them, we keep taking care of them, even though they're constantly violating our customs, that incentivizes not only them, but others to say, hey, I don't have to operate off these customs. I don't have to follow these rules, these standards that have been set up, because JoJo didn't, and he's still here, and we still love him. So we're going to just all violate the rules. That's how the game, when I talk about it from a street point of view, that's how the game got so convoluted, because there was no consequences to not following the code. The consequences disappeared. And for whatever reason, out of fear, out of just didn't care, whatever, the consequences vanished. So therefore, the code vanished. When I was a youngster coming up, when I first stepped off the porch, one of the first things I heard, or one of the first things I was given, is like when you're training in boxing, one of the first punches you learn to throw is a jab. That's your first thing you're gonna learn. You're gonna learn how to properly throw a jab, your jab, your cross, your uppercut. But you're gonna start with a jab. One of the first things I learned was what they called the G code. It was a G code. This thing don't exist. People don't even mention it anymore. But because the consequences for not following the code vanished. They disappeared. And dudes operated off what sociologists call game theory. They principles was too fluid. Principles only came out or was only spoken of when it benefited me. And if that principle didn't benefit me, then forget it. You know what I'm saying? But again, when I utilize principle from a holistic point of view, I'm talking about those things that can't be changed, those things that are, whether we want to accept it or not. Now, from a personal point of view, I am a true believer and advocate that every person should sit down and write their principles down. Now, evolved people that have evolved to a high level of consciousness, and I believe that the reason I got to a high level, not saying that I'm at a great level, but at a higher level than I once was because I did this practice of sitting down, writing my principles down, looking at them, and trying to get into a level of comprehension of what it is that I believe in, what it is that I operate off of, how do I foundate myself. And go ahead, E.
I would say that's a very good thing, but not for the reasons that you think. I would say that where you're saying you wrote them down because this is what you want to live by, and this is what you thought was going to be beneficial and do what you need to get done. These were the rules that you wanted to follow. At some point, you flip those, and they're no longer rules that you follow. They are characteristics of self that you are manifesting in this world. So no longer are they 10 commandments, thou shalt not, psych, thou shalt not, psych. They're not telling you to go out into the wild and here are your rules. They are rather the negative confession. When you come home at the end of the day, you say, I have not done this. I have not done that. Because you start to see that these are not something projected onto you. These are something that you exude, that these are descriptions of self, that you are learning and understanding yourself more by understanding how and when those rules apply. Why did you choose those rules? What do they reflect and say about me? So I'm not saying that rules don't have to be crystallized. Like I said early on, yes, at a point in life or a point in the life of an organization, the rules for an organization throughout, I guess, but the rules have to be, cemented. They have to be, okay, here they are, because we are dealing with people who don't have that understanding and who are, to whatever degree, followers and need to be led. And I guess that's kind of a difference between following and leading, is the whole, are you getting commandments or do you have the negative confession? Are you having to be told how to carry yourself in this world as a man? Or are you coming home and acknowledging, this is what I've done today? Like you used to say, at the end of the day, you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and feel like you deserve to rest. You deserve to go to sleep. Well, that's the negative confession. Have I checked these off? Did I act like this today? You're checking what it is you know to be yourself.
True indeed. And that led me back to the Bible analogy I was using. See, every man at some point, every single man, even Malcolm, has to be given those commandments. He has to be given, because those commandments are what disciplines him. The word discipline literally means training training to domesticate an animal, a wild animal. That's what the word literally means. So even Malcolm needed it. And those things that disciplined Malcolm, and they turned him from Detroit Red to Malcolm X, to the point where he got to a point where he no longer needed them. Then nobody had to tell him how he had to operate. He didn't have to read a paper to remember how to operate. He just lived. And that's what I was using with that Bible analogy. Moses had to bring them rules, laws, Deuteronomy, Leviticus. He had 10 commandments. He had to bring them laws to operate off of, because he was talking to a savage people that he was trying to civilize. But if you look in the New Testament, Jesus and Christians always try to use it without a comprehension. You're dealing with a spiritually evolved man, a master teacher who had actually conformed himself to such a degree by those laws that he no longer needed them. And he proclaimed it. He say, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill them. I don't run around here tripping on this 10 commandment stuff. I'm fulfilling them in my own actions, as you were talking about, Eve. I operate off them every single day. I am the walking, talking testament. You know what I'm saying? And that's not just for that guy. That's for any man who moves to that high level of spiritual evolution, where the laws, the rules, the morality is no longer needed, because he is the walking law. He is that in personification. You know what I'm saying? And that's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And that's the same difference between us now and us then. See, but we have to remember, we can never forget that everybody is not moving on that level. And that's why I wanted to do that class, that teaching on how to operate, how to write your principles down so you can understand what they are. When I first wrote my principles down, I wasn't writing down laws that you're going to follow this. I was actually questioning myself. And I started writing them down based on, as you just said, I'm bringing out what was already in me, things that I already followed. And then by writing them down, I was able to sit back and look at them, look up the definitions of the words that I chose to use, break those things down. And I'm like, okay, this is how I operate. Now, here's a mistake that I will admit that I have made in time, and that I'm correcting. That I have made the foolish error, I don't know why I did this, of thinking that everybody operates off my principles, and they don't. Everybody operates. See, in my mind, it's just basic common sense. Everybody moves like that, but everybody doesn't. Everybody got their own principles. Some dudes will cross you behind money. Some dudes will cross you behind women. Some dudes will cross you just because it's in their nature to do it. I was talking to a dude at work the other day. and we were talking about people not doing their job properly. And he was saying that, in his thinking, he was saying that the supervisor needed to be more strict. He said, because he say when he's not being strict, it gives too much leeway for the people not to properly do their job. And then his response was, hell, I do the same thing if ain't nobody being strict on me. And that guy that I was talking to was not telling a lie, because he does the same exact thing. But and when he said it, it kind of shocked me, because in my mind, it's like, I don't need to be governed. I don't need nobody to be strict on me. I know what I need to do. I get to it and I do it. Simple as that. Why do people want to be governed? But in management theory, in business class, they teach that you must understand that only 5% of the people in your organization are going to be leaders. Only a very small percentage of people are self-led or innovative, who knows how to just basically govern self. Only 5%. So the goal of a good supervisor is to identify that 5%, put those people in the right positions, and then allow them to guide the direction of the other 95%. That's what the goal is.
I got a question just on that. Was something I think we ought to at least acknowledge. When you talk about that in terms of that 5%, now we're also talking about a 5% in terms of conscious awareness. So from a mental and even a spiritual capacity, we're talking about a 5% of the population that controls the other 95% of the humanity. What's the difference between that and a 5% of the population controlling 95% of the physical wealth of the world? Just want to throw that.
Well, you know, maybe that's why that small percent is able to control the physical wealth of the physical world, because they're more aware of themselves and have the ability to do that self-maintenance and that self-governance, whether or not they do it for good or bad or whatever words we want to use for it. If you look at it, and this is, and I'm not trying to take this conversation into these waters, but this is one of the problems that I have and that I will debate with socialism. This is one of the problems I have with it. See, socialism as a theory sounds great on paper, but you have to always throw in the human element. And I've seen too many people, the mass majority of people, that don't want to put in the work. They don't want to stand up. They don't want to do what needs to be done. They don't take accountability. They're not responsible. They're not mature. They don't want to grow. They don't want to put in the work. So why should they eat when they don't want to put in the damn work? You know, and that's the problem. See, in socialist theory, you're assuming that you're dealing with a population of people that are willing to put in the work, a population of conscious, rational adults that are willing to put in the work, take responsibility for their own actions, and to be accountable. In that situation, socialist theory would be beautiful, but not in this situation. These low-life people that we come across and run into nowadays, I don't think these people deserve those benefits of those who are willing to put in the work, willing to do the studies, willing to do those things. I say it all the time. Like one of the most famed phrases in American society and the American lexicon is, everybody has a right to their opinion. I don't agree. If you ain't put in the work, if you ain't did the studies, if you ain't actually put some facts and some proof behind that opinion, you don't have a right to your opinion, because that exercise of that opinionated right is going to do nothing but put false ideas, false concepts, and false beliefs into the airways. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. You should be quiet. You don't have a right to anything but to sit down, shut up, get a pen and pad, and listen. And that's how I look at that.
Now, I said what I said because I also wanted to draw out the fact that we're talking about a population of people that has been weaponized against its own ability to be conscious. So there's a level of codependency that has been created. And that codependency has basically traveled from generation to generation to generation. And the more we move into a technocrat environment, the more we move away from collective principles and collective values, which is why what you're talking about in regards to socialism is hard to fathom that, because as we fall for the trap of individualism as a people, as humanity, then what happens with that is we lose our abilities to have freedoms. We exchange freedoms for protection, quote unquote protection, by a few. And when we do that, then we are creating levels of codependency, whether we talk about physical, mental, spiritual codependency. Those codependencies are what basically get us in troubles in the first place, which goes back to why law now reigns supreme over principle, why law reigns supreme over ethics. So I just wanted to throw that monkey wrench out there.
He throwing it at you, bro. He ain't throwing it at me.
I don't disagree with that. I don't. So it's not. I mean, it's just an assessment of what's going on. But I'm gonna tell you another one of my principles, and I say it all the time. Another one of my principles is what I call the reality principle, or the reality habit. I honestly got it from a book I read years ago called $1 Million Habits by this dude named Robert Ringer. And one of the habits, he breaks down, I think, like 8 or 9 habits that puts you in a millionaire mindset. And he's not talking about millionaire from the perspective of having a whole lot of money to blow. He's not talking about that. He's talking about it from how, I think it was Jim Rohn that said this, make a goal to become a millionaire, not for the money, but for the type of person, the type of disciplined, focused, hardworking person that you would have to be in order to acquire millions from nothing. So make a goal to become a millionaire for that. And so in the book, he prefaces the book with that idea. And then he talks about the habits that extremely productive people have. And one of those habits was the reality habit. Now, this blew my mind away. It's simple. Sometimes the most simple things give you the greatest insight. This is simple, and it makes all the sense in the world. Reality is what it is. It's not what we want it to be. It ain't even what it should be. It is what it is. We have to get in the habit of looking at things for what they are. Whether we like them or not is unimportant. It's irrelevant. Looking at it for what it is and then dealing with it. Just simply assessing the situation and then dealing with it. And a lot of times, most people don't practice the reality habit. They're too stuck on what I call the cartoon reality. They're too stuck on the way things should be. What they taught us growing up watching cartoons, and the good guy always wins, and justice always prevails. We're stuck on that idea that we should see that, and that doesn't always. Matter of fact, a lot of times that is not what you're going to experience. So we have to get in the habit of dealing with reality. I'm an ultra realist. And it doesn't mean, I know I done told y'all this before, and y'all a lot of times y'all think that means that I have no spiritual foundation and things like that. That's not what that means. It means that I deal with reality as it is, regardless if I like it or not. I've had people in my life that I just simply had to accept the reality that they are simply no good for me, regardless of how I felt about them personally. They're no good. So I had to move myself from these people. Or I've been in situations where and I'm not going to get into the details of the long situation, but I've been in situations where I felt like that this should happen. You dealing with family members, you dealing with the fact that you have custody of your children, you dealing with a lot of things. You feel like they shouldn't take my life from me. They should understand this. No one was hurt. They should know. No, the reality is that a lot of times when you're dealing with human beings want vengeance. They want, in their mind, they're justified, but they want revenge for them having their feelings hurt. You have to learn how to deal with reality and then make your plans based on reality. If you make your plan based on a false reality, then your plans are going to be false and you're never going to get the things that you're trying to get out of life.
Let me say this. I think what you're talking about, again, just from a weaponization standpoint, is the concept, going back to what you stated earlier about goals. The deal is to keep the people, the population, in the mind frame of hopes, ambitions, and dreams. Hopes, ambitions, and dreams, and keeping them stuck in that cycle without ever making it concrete. Because once you put it down or committed to writing, at that point, now you go back into the concept of scribing. Once you do that, it creates a channel for vision. And that channel for vision goes into the concept of creating manifestation, which is going to bring that into your life, into the reality, going back to it is what it is. So in order to weaponize a population against each other, or a people against the individual, and let the individual reign supreme, you keep them asphyxiated on hopes, dreams, and ambitions, and they stay in that phase. That trifactor stays: hopes, ambitions, and dreams. And you got to recognize that is primarily what's being done to the masses. On the flip side of that, going back to what we talked about, what I threw out there in terms of the elite, when a person is on a quest for high levels of knowledge, high levels of consciousness, then you cross into the territory of going after something from the standpoint of being able to take in whatever levels of gain that you can acquire. Look at that from a physical standpoint in terms of profit. When you talk about imperialism and you talk about capitalism, it's about maximizing the highest level of return and not ever putting a cap on that. And at that point, when you don't put a cap on it, you get to a level to where something becomes unethical, which is when they talk about unethical business practices. An ethical business practice goes into the fact that you know damn well this pill that only costs 15 cents to make don't need to cost $3,000 a pop. But because of your ambition, because of your ability to be able to maximize profit without restrictions, creates that monopolization, creates that situation to where now you are making a society codependent upon you, codependent upon your kindness, codependent upon your product. And it's no different than how when you talk about the dope game, or someone would talk about the dope game, they will front that product up front. Why? Because the idea is to hook you on it. Somebody give you a bump of crack for free. That first one, going back to despise the free lunch, they give you that first hit for free. Why? Because they know what's going to happen to you after you take that first hit. Now your entire world is going to be based upon being at that level of hopes, dreams, and ambitions. And all you at that point is doing is chasing the product I have to offer. So when you flip that to the standpoint of talking about the mentality that people may have when it has to do with achieving high levels of mental and spiritual consciousness, equate that in terms of a society that does not deal with the holistic being and apply those same concepts, but on a material level. See, when we're not a holistic being, we can compartmentalize physical, mental, and spiritual. And when we keep them in these lanes and we allow ourselves to be tricked into thinking that one does not involve the other, then we get a society that is dysfunctional. And then going back to how we started the show, we're given definitions. When I don't know the difference between a dysfunctionality and a true sickness, and I operate from it as a sickness, then I may prescribe myself some type of quote unquote medication or some type of suppressant to basically cope with the condition. Whereas if I was really aware of the fact that the true definition of what I'm dealing with is dysfunctionality, then I would actually approach it differently and remove and eradicate that behavior from my being, from my reality. And therefore, I would actually be in alignment with tackling it from the standpoint of a solution-based approach, as opposed to just suppressing the symptoms. Now translate that, Brother E, from Warridian.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, but shit, I couldn't write that fast. There's a lot of moments in there. I might have to let that shit slide. It's asphyxiation. I'm not sure what that is, but I think you made your point.
Does that mean to be strangled or can't breathe? Ain't that what asphyxiation means?
Well, that's asphyxiation, yeah. But
Asphyxiation.
I think
he was saying
for
fixation.
There you go.
Like being fixated
That,
on something. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
He threw me. Yeah, he threw me for a minute. Okay. Now I'm gonna read something to y'all. So we talk about principles. This is what I'm building on right now. This book here, Principles by Ray Dalio. I'm expecting E to do some fighting, but I'm gonna read this right quick. It says, principles are fundamental truths that serve as the foundations for behavior that gets you what you want out of life. They can be applied again and again in similar situations to help you achieve your goals. Every day, each of us is faced with a blizzard of situations we must respond to. Without principles, we will be forced to react to all things in life throws at us individually as if we are experiencing each of them for the first time. If instead we classify these situations into types and have good principles for dealing with them, we will make better decisions more quickly and have better lives as a result. Having a good set of principles is like having a good collection of recipes for success. All successful people operate by principles that help them to be successful, though what they choose to be successful at varies enormously, so their principles vary. Now, this kind of talks about what kind of goes to what E was saying about the fluidity and different types of people. Like he said, having a good set of principles is like having a good collection of recipes for success. All successful people operate by principles that help them be successful, though what they choose to be successful at varies enormously, so their principles vary. And he says here, because we each have our own goals and our own natures, each of us must choose our own principles to match them. While it isn't necessarily a bad thing to use others' principles, adopting principles without giving them much thought can expose you to the risk of acting in ways inconsistent with your goals and your nature. So I'm never saying that we're supposed to crystallize the entire population of 8 billion plus people on the planet into one structured set of principles. Again, though, there are certain principles that I don't think any of us can get away from, can actually avoid. Like last time we did this show, War said one of his personal principles was that how did he say it? He said that everything, basically, essentially, to paraphrase him, everything you do is going to have a consequence, essentially. Everything that you do and don't do will have a reaction, will have a response. It's kind of like what Einstein is accredited with saying, that every action will have an equal and opposite reaction. And essentially that's what War said last time. And like I said, when I named some of the principles of economics, the 10 principles in every economic book that you open, they're going to give you the 10 foundational principles of economics. I know I got a damn economic textbook over here to show you what I'm talking about. You know, I love my books. I know y'all can't see a lot of this stuff. But like in the 10 principles of economics, principle 1 is people face trade-offs. You can never have everything you want. You have to face a trade-off. You don't have unlimited amount of money. You don't have an unlimited amount of time. In order to be here doing this show, this episode right now, you can't be in the bed sleep. You have to be here. You had to trade one of them off for the other. I can't be eating the dinner that I done cooked in there because I'm doing it. We have to trade off. We can't do it all. So we have to ask ourselves what's more prevalent for the time being, and then choose that thing. In order for War to fix his wife's tire for a car so she can get to work in the morning, he had to push back the show an hour. We all face trade-offs. That's a principle of economics. And see, they set these 10 foundational principles so that you can comprehend and then start thinking economically. Make economic decisions based off this reality. Principle 2, the cost of getting something is what you give up to get it. See, the cost of getting something, I'm not going to go through all 10 of them and bore y'all to death Economics is just one of those social sciences that I actually happen to like. But the cost of getting something is not only the price tag that you're paying for it, but it's also what you had to give up to get that particular thing. That's why when I give people money, I don't give people my money, I make them work for it. But that's why I'm like that. People think I'm cheap. I'm not cheap. I don't overvalue money. But however, I have started looking at money from a different perspective. I understand that I live in a society where the labor philosophy in this society is that I trade my time for money. So when you ask me for a certain amount of money, what you're asking me for is a certain amount of time that I can never get back. See, I can always make some money. I've always been able to earn money, hustle up some money. Hell, sometimes I'm asleep and wake up in the morning, look at my phone and got a couple of dings off eBay where I done made some more money. But we can always make some more money. You can't make no more time. That's why they give people so much time. That's why they give people so much time in the penitentiary. Take away your ability to actually put your stamp on the planet. So when people ask me for my money, what they're really doing is asking me for my time. And that's why I changed that perspective, because I understand that the cost of something is not necessarily how much I paid, and that's necessarily what I paid for, but what I had to give up to get it. You know, those are principles that I think that there are certain principles on this planet that we can't get away from. Not until we rearrange some of the ways that the planet itself is operating. There are certain things we just can't get away from. Those principle foundations that we stand on. But from the point of view of what I just read from the book Principles, is those personal principles that we govern our own lives, our own personal universes off of. And that's why I say I think it's important for a person to know what those things are. Even if they don't let nobody else know what they are, I think it's important for them to know. You know, and there are people that are unprincipled, that have their only principle is, and I'm supposed to contradict myself because that's a lie, they ain't unprincipled. They do have one. Me. Whatever it takes to make sure I get what I want. There are hedonistic people that operate, and I say, when I'm talking about these people, because, you know, I like to use the chakra system. And if you understand the 7 points of the chakra system, those people that are only operating within their first three, the first, second, and third chakras, those people are usually the most destructive, backbiting, backstabbing, what we call in the hood, we use the term, forget my language, bitch ass nigga, hoe ass nigga.
Whoa.
Yeah, them the term. But when people are operating on those first three chakras, because those first three chakras, and I just sit back and drew maps and tried to explain this to people, thinking it might inspire them to elevate themselves. When you're just operating out those first three chakras, you at your reptile level, you at your low animal level, where you're just simply operating to survive. Basically, I need somewhere to sleep and stay warm at, to have sex, I need something to come in, and to eat. And that belly chakra, that third one, is not always just overeating, but it also deals with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and things of that nature. The person that those first three, they're in what's called, and we could do a whole nother show on this, symbolically, they're in hell. That's what the whole concept of hell was. Hell is below, because hell is if you're just limited to those first three chakras, you're in hell. You don't even have the ability to empathize with another human being yet. You don't get that until you get to the fourth chakra, which is called the heart chakra. You don't have the ability to have an expansion of love for other people until you get there. And so if you're just at the first three, you're just a reptile. You're still crawling out of the water trying to find a worm to eat. You know what I'm saying?
I still say what this goes to is especially how you end it. Back to what I talked about on our last show, when we talked about relationships that are based on reduction in order to detach the essence of definition. Because when we don't have the ability to define our life and deal with self-governance, then you're again relying upon a system that is creating that governance for you, which is that codependency. And that codependency is going to make you have a shallow sense of existence. And therefore, everything that you think you need is going to be defined outside of you. So you're not going to be at a point to where you can understand and overstand anything. It's always understanding stuff. And so when a person basically operates on that low level of existence, you know, whether we talk about it from the mental, physical, or spiritual level, then that goes into the whole thing that you're talking about with the root chakra. But also be aware of the fact that, and this is kind of one discussion we kind of had off the books, is that there are certain things that are being done that are of a demonic or a immoral perspective intentionally. So we have to separate dysfunctionalities from just pure evil and pure technology, because when you're dealing with weaponization, when you're dealing with a people that has been turned against itself, against its own true essence and true nature, you're dealing with warfare. You're dealing with a prescribed methodology that has been implemented on the population for the sake of dumbing down the population and keeping that population quailed at that level, which what I call basically operating below a 6th grade education level, and doing it to the degree of making that a way of life beyond adult, beyond a child age, to the point to where mentally parts of your psyche is not able to develop. So you have a whole lot of immature adults as it applies to critical consciousness walking the planet. And therefore, like any other muscle, when you don't use it, you lose it. And the older you get, different neural network connections are formed that replace the ability for you to be able to think inside of yourself, for you to be able to see inner reflection through someone else's eyes. And because of that, because those neural networks have now replicated and redefined themselves to look outward as opposed to inward, that gets passed down naturally from the standpoint of nurture from generation to generation. And that initial act of evil that was embedded within that population has now manifested itself as a form of dysfunctionality. And because we don't call it what it is, and because we allow it to be defined for us, we can't form a proper weapon against it. So therefore, when you have the few that have that level of consciousness, that are able to see it for what it is, and they don't know how to share that vision with the rest of the group, and the rest of that group, not only even if you are able to share the vision, the rest of the group have this level of laziness that has been embedded within it to the degree to where it can't function at that high level. Oftentimes you create the paradox to where they are unable or unwilling to catch up. And therefore, now you are at this crossroad to where do you just operate, move by yourself, or do you do your best to try to raise and elevate the consciousness of the people? See, that goes back to the elements of being a Panther. It's about raising the consciousness of the people, but you have to accept the fact that, going back to what you said, it is what it is. It's like that. Obviously, not everybody's going to get it. Obviously, there are only so many people that are able to be leaders. But we have to teach leadership on the level of the individual, the family, and the collective, and get the people to be able to see the interaction and exchange that takes place on all those levels. Therefore, even if you're not able to raise the consciousness of the people to the level of being able to remove themselves from that certain level of codependency as it applies to the oppressor, then at least the consciousness can be raised to the level of the next generation having a little bit of less of a will to reinvent.
I mean, principles are fine. Principles are what they are. Our problem is we cling to the principle, defend the principle, live and die by the principle. It's like the finger pointing at the moon. The principle's supposed to be taking you along a path, part of a process, but we're stuck right there on that principle and living on that principle and making that our purpose, and not realizing that there's something beyond that principle, something greater than that principle. You know, children or principles discipline children, the actions of children. Principles also define the character of a man. But at some point, principles begin to describe the essence of the all, and that's the process. It's all supposed to be processed. So, yeah, at certain time, I mean, the principles exist out there, they float around or whatever, and they get, codified, solidified, courtside, at different points in time, because you can't observe them. Now, if you think about it in terms of observing, you can't observe something that's moving too fast. It has to stop and it has to be still. It has to be at a pace that you can grab onto with your eyes and observe it. At the same time with principles, you can't observe the principle without having it crystallized in some sense in your mind on a piece of paper somewhere. So you can't observe what the principle is telling you. Just the same way as you can't, an electron going around an atom can't be measured or quantified without it being stopped. Whatever measurement you take, that's at one particular place at one particular time. It's not throughout the existence of it. And that's the same thing as these principles. These principles are a snapshot at one point in time of the overall process. And so we have to get away from clinging to any part of the process, but rather picking up the process and taking it with us, and stepping out beyond it when it's necessary, because it does become necessary. Like your man said in the book you just read, he said principles are there to get you what you want. That's it. That's it. No matter how dope a principle sounds, you still choose whether or not to do it.
True indeed.
Principle ain't making you do it. You still choose that. So it's still you. Principle is just some writing on a paper. It's just some words. It's like that's not, when people try to describe anything. My shirt is not the word shirt. My shirt is, the principles are not the words on the piece of paper. The principles are.
I agree, and I agree 100% with you. I agree.
So it's being able to flow into the shirt, into the principle, and flowing back up out of it, knowing that my shirt is still in the closet, but it's not necessary at this point in time.
But and I can even agree with that. But one of the things that we have to understand is that the human being makes sense of our reality through those symbols, the verbal symbols that we call words, or any other symbol. We make sense of our reality through that. So we have to box it in. We have to ice cube it. We have to turn it into an ice cube in order to be able to control where it goes. We have to.
But that's the thing.
Hold on, hear me out. Because without that mental framework, without creating that, we can't comprehend our reality. We can't even comprehend what it is that I'm trying to, like he said in the book, and like you just reinforced, that we take on these principles in order to accomplish our goals, in order to get what we want. We have to even be able to define that for ourselves so that we can have a direction in mind. I've had dudes tell me that they don't believe in making plans because you cannot plan for the inevitable. You can't plan for everything. What if something goes wrong? And I've explained to them that things will go a whole lot better if you have a plan. Yes, we can't plan for every possible thing that happens, but is it wise to just simply not plan because we don't know if tomorrow a plane gonna fall out of the sky and crush the freeway on my way to work? I don't know that. I'm not going to operate off these what could haves and what may have. I'm gonna sit up and I'm gonna develop a plan. When I was incarcerated, I wrote a success plan before I walked out. I could show it to you right now. That success plan, it wasn't my goals, it was a success plan. And then based on that success plan, I did write a set of goals. Then I wrote the things that I would have to learn, know, and be willing to do in order to get to accomplish those goals. Everything on just about, I ain't gonna say everything because I'm not at the point where I don't have to worry about working anymore. But just about everything on that success plan happened before the time that I put on my success plan for it to happen. Everything happened. I put a time frame on these things. And all of them came into being and fell in line before it happened because I was focused. And that's what the purpose of prayer and meditation is. We think that some magical force is coming out of the sky. It's all in you. So when you pray, it's about focusing intention. It's about focusing the consciousness toward a particular direction. And then if you move in prayer, why it says pray without ceasing. There's no way to perform that ritual of getting on your knees with your hands like this without ceasing, or you would never eat, you would never bathe, you couldn't go to work. So that's impossible. To get up and go to work or to go eat means that you're violating that command to pray without ceasing. Praying without ceasing is to be operating at this harmonious level where I'm going in the proper direction, where I'm on purpose. That's what prayer without ceasing means. And to get there, we as human beings, we have to codify these things so that we can comprehend them more. Until we get to the point where we no longer need them, where we become the book of Eli. Eli no longer needed the book. He had it here, and he could recite it. He could speak it. And that's what I'm talking about. But in the beginning stages, when you're dealing with somebody who you don't put them on 20 burpees out the gate. You got to put them on what they can deal with in order to get them to that level of strength where they can bring 20 burpees like it ain't nothing. And that's what I'm talking about having people to write their principles down. Because you have a directionless people running around here not knowing what to do or where to go. And so that is one of the first stages, one of the principal things that you could do to get yourself operating on the level that you need to operate on.
And I like I said, I agree. They have to be written down for children because that's what children need. You know, that's what they needed in the 10 Commandments to tell them how to act. This is how you're supposed to behave. But I do your analogy, the example that you gave about the plane crashing. I think about that. I always have those types of things. I don't worry about them, but I do sit back and wonder, wonder if a plane, what would happen if a plane crashed on top of me right now? I think about those things. And for me, looking back, what it's come to do in my mind is to be a realist reminder, the realist of realist reminder. That reminder being that you can't control where the principle goes. At some point, there has to be enough strength of character to understand that that principle is supposed to control where you go. That principle is supposed to be guiding you in a direction that you follow the principle, because that's not the same as controlling the principle. The principles are there. The principles are greater than any of us, wherever they exist. And we're not in a position to control any of them, but rather to observe, whether we're standing back and looking at them, observe, or we're walking in them type of observe. It's for us to observe. And we get to a point where we begin to understand that we try to control where these principles go, control anything, because control is a reaction to fear. And that chaos that we're worried about, we got to have principles and all these things solidified to tell us where to go. At some point, we have to grow to the point where we embrace that fear, that reality, that we don't control them, that they are what they are, and we can either get on board and in pursuit of understanding ourselves through them, better understand our purpose, which reinforces the principles, which again guide us in a direction and leads us back to the beginning is with us, and we reevaluate, redefine, define, develop, and defend, and move on with that principle in tow, moving forward. And that's why we get caught up. We don't have that courage, that character anymore. We'd rather just live in the superficial aspects of it and say, these are my principles and this is what I live in. I'm not saying, you know me, we already know I'm not saying you. But generally speaking, people take those principles, and because we're so fear-based, as long as I hold on to these principles, as long as I hold on to my Bible, as long as I go to church, as long as I do what Jesus tells me, these are the principles that we hold on to because they help us to be numb to the fear, help us to ignore the fear, but not to embrace that fear, that darkness, that unknown. When I say darkness, I'm saying the unknown. I'm saying that which you have not experienced, that is no less a reality, despite the fact that you haven't experienced it, particularly about self. And so we don't do that. We don't do that type of self-interest. But I was watching your boy, what's his name, Samuel?
Kevin Samuels.
Yeah, he was talking to some chick, and he asked her, the whole conversation about, bringing stuff to the table and all that. He said, well, he said, she listed off some good stuff. He said, well, what are your flaws? She sat there, thought, he asked her several more times, and she never could name off a single flaw, except that she can't submit to the wrong man, you know, which is bullshit.
Yeah. But basically redirecting it back to the man.
Yeah,
and it's not really her problem. Yeah.
So this type of inability to reflect on self, to even step back and say, yeah, this is, I do this, I do that, I need to improve here and improve there. We don't do that type of, that introspection. And so these principles don't help us the way that they should, because we're fearful of looking into ourselves and confronting those demons and confronting those things in an attempt to realize our purpose. And that's why so many of us live on accident. We don't live on purpose. We live on accident because we're clinging to whatever makes us comfortable. And we live for the food, so we become obese. We live for the weed, so we become addicts. You know, we live for the thing as opposed to what the thing is telling us, and we get stuck right there in that crystallization. It ain't nothing wrong with being crystallized. You go from ninja to samurai, do it all the time at work. Sometimes I gotta headbutt motherfuckers at work. Sometimes I gotta wiggle behind them to get what I need to get done. But like the Bible says, there's a time for everything. And so being able to overstand, and that's the difference between understanding and overstanding, I guess, is when you overstand something, now you can use it to your advantage. You're no longer under it, you're standing over it, and you can manipulate it, you know, and you can time it. There are certain laws, immutable laws, transmitters, what's his name, the Emerald Tab, that can't be violated, but they can, the reality can be manipulated in a sense, so that if the pendulum is swinging back, you can see it coming or feel it coming, and you can slide yourself out of the way and continue and carry on without feeling the overwhelming effects of that particular thing. So it's not that principles are concrete, because they are and they aren't, and they have to be are and aren't. They can't be one or the other without it, you know, and that's a whole nother topic of discussion, I guess. But yeah, we're caught up in the principle being our purpose. So we're obese with principles. Everybody in this motherfucking country got principles that they say, but very few, I say nobody, but nobody enough is actually doing what the principles are supposed to do, which is to evolve the person, evolve the being, so that we better understand self, which reveals our purpose. It's like me doing this shit out here with all of this. I didn't set out to do this shit. I, over a period of time, after talking all this shit about being an African, okay, and it wasn't something I just said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and do it then. That's not how it happened. But because I said it to myself so many times and read so much about it, understood it, I started doing these things. And then you get to a point in hindsight and be like, damn, I'm actually starting to do a lot of those things that, you know, were put out there. So it guided me and pushed me in a particular direction, because I understood myself more through the application of principles and other things. And so my understanding of my purpose was always there, but my understanding, my understanding, the revelation of the purpose became more and more clear. And so the more and more I focused on it, the more and more those principles revealed themselves and moved me in a particular direction. That's all.
Now we moving into about 8:22, so we finna get ready to get into a close. But I'm gonna add this and see, just and what you just said is why I always say that people need to sit down and write their principles down, because it forces you to understand what your principles. I'm not talking about writing somebody else's principles down, but when you ask yourself, man, because most people ain't asked themselves this, what do I believe? What do I stand on? You know what I'm saying? People ain't asked themselves this. People ain't sit down and took out the time to really do this. And that forces introspection and retrospection. You know, when you have to do this. When I had to sit down and write my principles down, I had to look in, but then I also had to look back. What have I stood on before? What have I, I've had to look back and ask myself which one of these things, how have I operated in past times? When did I feel bad about myself? When did I feel bad? I had to ask myself these questions. And then from there, I was able to sit down and write and as you say, these principles are already in here. I just put them on paper so I can look at them, and then they became manifest. You know, one of the most powerful things that I haven't completed it myself yet. One of the most powerful things that I think a person can do, we think, man, I know what I believe. I know what my ideas are. But I know y'all done had this same situation where you done been in a debate and things that came out of you that you did not know was there. You didn't know that they had stuck. You know what I'm saying? You done been in that situation. And that's the same thing with writing. I've sat down and started in writing and journaled and started my autobiography, and just things came out and I was like, godly, man, I didn't know that. You know, and it helps you in a comprehension of self. It helps. And that's why I used to always tell the brothers that whenever I'm building with you, I'm doing it for myself. Whenever I'm studying by myself, I'm doing it for you. Because the studying is what reinforces my ability to be able to teach. But when I'm teaching, that's what confirms my ability to retain what I've learned. That's what I'll be like, man, I didn't know I knew that. Man, and y'all know it. Y'all know it. Sometimes when you're in teaching mode, it's like doing martial arts. You be like, man, that was pretty loud right there. I did a nice one. You know, it's like playing basketball, man. That was a nice 360 dunk.
That shit felt good.
You know what I'm saying? And it comes out in that way. And that's why those things are so important. Because the majority of people don't do this. And matter of fact, I've seen people, when I asked them these particular questions, what are you going to do? They done got angry. They got angry. They got angry because deep inside they say, you put me on the spot. I ain't thought about this stuff. I ain't gave no thoughts and ideas to this. You know, and these things are extremely important. You know what I'm saying? But I'm gonna let it go around the circle before we get ready to close out and see if anybody had anything to say, any rebuttals. Last words, rebuttals, clarifications, anything like that.
No.
War.
Yeah, I got something.
You talking about Floridian friends.
Just to close out on the concept of what we're talking about that separates the majority of the people, goes into the appetite for personal growth versus collective growth. And we need to work on helping the masses develop the proper appetite. And when you have collective growth as it applies to that appetite, it will feed back into the personal growth. And then this also tags into the difference between universal law as opposed to political law. Whereas universal law is based on the whole picture, and political law is based on one group's position of authority over another person, place, or thing. And so as people come into consciousness of themselves and really be able to introspect that, then what happens is they continually develop the proper appetite for those neuron connections that we talked about earlier, to be able to form the right connections to where you get into the mode of what Psych is talking about when he says basically writing something down to the point to where that's what I call that is automatic writing or meditative writing, to where things are connected and pass through you. The same thing happened when people get in a high level of artistic space, to where you're able to craft something that you can sit back and admire because you didn't necessarily know it was there, because you're actually tapping into the collective awareness, the collective stream of power and knowledge and wisdom. And so from that standpoint, that's where we need to take the people to that level of what I refer to as critical consciousness. That critical consciousness will bring us to that level, will bring us to that appetite, will get us to where we need to be, to where these principles are able to be embodied.
I'm glad you said that, because
I need to get the whole world high.
I was glad you said that, Ward, because I was going to go to that neural connection you talked about. But I meant to say this before I close. Principles and actually being able to live on them principles, not control them. I wasn't using the word control as we're trying to control the principles, but trying to control my comprehension of the principles or anything in my reality. Whenever we put a definition on it, we put a framework of control in our own mind. not to control from domination standpoint, but it's the only way the human mind comprehends reality is through those symbolic definitions, so to speak. And to speak on World War, that is why, and I copied it. I can admit it, because I think that's what we're supposed to do. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we're supposed to use what has worked. I copied it from the Nation of Islam and the 5% brothers that required you to learn their information when I created the Uhuru Shule and made it a necessity for the brothers to memorize the 10 virtues of a student. I made it a requirement. You can't even start studies until you learn the 10 virtues of a student. But the reason that works and is so powerful is because of what Walt just said. See, the brain specializes. It will actually prune itself because the brain is using energy from the body. It's using energy to function. It is constantly using energy. So what the brain does, in order not to waste energy, it will actually kill neural pathways that you are not using, because the brain just figures, if I don't use this, then I don't need it. Let me get rid of it because it's draining energy from the body. That's why I done seen brothers try to read and be like, God, Lee, man, I was so good at reading in school. I don't know what happened. I used to be good at math in school. I don't know what happened, because you have been using it and the brain has been pruning those neural pathways that were developed just for that. So anything that you practice on a consistent basis actually becomes habit forming. We like to say practice makes perfect, but perfection only comes in perfect striving, meaning that you constantly deal with it, because you're going to fall, you're going to stumble, you're going to make mistakes, but you got to consistently strive and struggle toward that personal development. So when you do that, your brain creates neural pathways just for those activities, because the brain thinks, oh, if we're doing this every day, then I need this for the purpose of survival. We have to strengthen these neural pathways. This has to be on automatic, systematic remote control. And that's what it becomes. It'll start actually becoming your automatic response to things because you done practiced it so long. And that's why a lot of the brothers who never graduated from school, who considered themselves poor readers, once they took out the time to learn and memorize the 10 virtues of a student, or to memorize the 5% of supreme mathematics, or whatever it was that those brothers were building on, that's why their confidence built up. Because confidence comes with competence. Once they started seeing that they was competent in an intellectual activity, then they created confidence, which automatically made them want to develop more, which created more competence. And that's all I want to say. If your brothers don't have nothing to say, we finna get ready to close out.